Hello everyone and welcome to our brand new podcast, Outwith. My name's Halla and I'll be your host on this journey. If you're watching this on YouTube, do not adjust your sets. We are in my kitchen. We are around my kitchen table. And this is because not only is this my favourite room in the house, but this is also where, certainly in my family, I don't know in your family, but we always put the world to rights here at the kitchen table. We always sit down. This is where the most frank discussions are had. This is where the conversation happens in my house. And this is where I want the conversation to happen in this podcast as well. I'm a journalist. Apologies for that for people who are very much anti-media at the moment. But I am a journalist and my career has taken me all over the world. I worked in China for over 6 years. I worked in the Far East, in Malaysia, in the Philippines. I worked in France for 4 years at a 24-hour news channel. And I'm now working in Scotland. So we're here in my kitchen in Scotland. I'm still working as a journalist, but I am a journalist who still has very much their eyes on the world. I'm very interested in what's happening. Beyond my current patch right now, I still have an interest in what's happening away from home. And what I find interesting is the fact that the stories that were very important to people I was reporting to in China are very similar to the stories that I'm reporting to people here in Scotland. We have so much more in common than we have that divides us. We're all interested in educational matters. We're interested in how the economies of the places that we're living in, how those economies are doing. We're interested in environmental matters, political matters as well, how it affects our families, our friends, the societies we live in. All these things are very common threads. The only thing which changes to a certain extent is geography, and that's why I do continue to follow international news. And I think that these things remain important to us. So this is something I'd like to keep doing. I like to keep talking about big issues, projects that people find interesting no matter where you are in the world. But oftentimes these stories, these things we find interesting, you don't often see them in the news bulletins that you watch, which are, you're very restricted by time, or in your newspapers where you're restricted by space. So in this podcast, I'm hoping that we take these issues and we give them the room and the space to breathe. So this podcast is called Outwith. If you're listening to this podcast Outwith Scotland, you might not know what we're talking about. It's a very Scottish word and it means beyond, it means outside of. So if you're listening to this podcast outside of Scotland, that's essentially what the name means. And the reason that I'm kind of fixated on this word is because when I was working in France, and I remember I submitted my copy to my editor just to get it signed off, and she was going through it and she was like, "Oh, it's fine, except for I don't know what that means. I don't know what that word is." And I was like, "What, outwith? It means outwith. It means outside of. It's beyond. It's the opposite of within." And I thought she just didn't get it due to a language issue because, English was her second language. And I took it around the newsroom and I took it to my Irish colleagues, my English colleagues, my Australian colleagues. And no one seemed to get what this word was until I hit upon another Scottish colleague, and they were like, yeah, no, it means outwith. And as soon as we started explaining the concept of this, everyone was like, oh, that's such a useful word. So hopefully by getting this word and this podcast out there, other people will grasp the concept of this very useful word. It's one single word that will take you beyond, outside of, and it's and that's what we're hoping to do. We're hoping to go beyond the borders of the place where we currently are. We want to look at stories which are outside of our individual areas, our individual towns. We want to talk about stories which don't quite make it into the headlines of a restrictive news bulletin or a paper with not enough space. We want to go beyond these constraints and give these stories which are important to people all over the world. We want to give these stories the room and the space to breathe, because by doing so, by taking these issues, complex issues, which might not normally make it into your news bulletin in the country you're listening from, or the newspaper that's very time and space constricted, By giving these stories more space to breathe, we get a better understanding of the world we live in. So that's what we're hoping to do with this podcast. We're going to be broadcasting once a week. I'm going to be sitting down and chatting with individuals. We're going to be talking through the issues of the day, hopefully putting the world to rights, or at least we're going to be trying to understand what the issues are in the world so that then we can start putting things to rights. And I want you guys to be part of the conversation. I want to welcome you into my home so that we can understand more about the things which are happening, understand more about the issues which are going on, and hopefully get a better understanding of the world that we are living in. So tune in once a week. Do follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to the podcast if you can. And I look forward to chatting to you again soon. Bye.